Hi and welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to be looking at how to make a chicken liver parfait. Really simple recipe. Everybody gets very tied up in how difficult making pâtés and preserving meats are, but actually they're really quite simple to do. This is a parfait, which is a form of chicken liver pâté, and it will be absolutely perfect with some crisp toast, a few cornichons, maybe a little bit of saucisson sec and a couple of slices of celery on the side. It'll end up looking something like this because it will be covered in butter at the end just to preserve it. It won't preserve it very long, 2 or 3 days in the fridge, but I don't think it'll be a problem just 2 or 3 days in the fridge. It'll be lucky if it lasts 12 hours. So, for chicken liver pâté, we have obviously chicken livers. This is about 400 grams of chicken livers. And you'll notice 3 piles of butter. We have one little piece here about 25 grams, one at about 55 grams, and this chopped up pile here represents about 1/4 to 1/3 of the weight of the chicken livers. We also have a glass of sherry. It happens to be a glass of dry sherry. Doesn't have to be a sherry. It could be a sweet sherry, it could be a Madeira, it could even be a port, a whiskey, a brandy, a rum. It doesn't really matter what it is. You're just looking for a little bit of extra flavour there. Also, we have some salt, we have some peppercorns, and we have a grinder for grinding black peppercorns as well. I also have a collection of ramekins and bowls which will be used for the finished pâté. The recipe will be below this particular video. So let's begin. Nice hot frying pan. The 25-gram piece of butter into the frying pan. It should sizzle. You want this butter sizzling and piping hot. Maybe not to the point where it burns, but it doesn't matter if it goes to the point where it becomes sort of Bernoisette nut butter. So that's not a problem, which is this is doing quite nicely actually. As soon as it is all melted, on that high heat, straight in with the chicken livers. Now, these chicken livers, they will spit and spangle and make rude noises at you right the way in the pan. You may well get tiny little burns up and down your arms, but we're not actually keeping them in there for very long. So again, this is on a very high heat. This is on full blast on my machine here. So you really want to push these around quite fast and quite hard and get them sizzling. They'll have come from the fridge probably as well, so it'll take a little bit of time to get some heat into them. Realistically, you want every part of the outside of these chicken livers browned. So you don't want to see any of the lovely purple colour, though you don't want to cook them brutally the whole way through so they're like leather. Because if you cook them through like leather, you're going to have trouble with the colour of the pâté and actually the texture of the pâté as well. It's going to be a bit stiff and horrible and not very spreadable. Now, lots of people will add a cream to their parfait. Because strictly speaking, this isn't a chicken liver pâté, it's a chicken liver parfait. I don't add cream. I think I prefer that slightly more livery, richer, slightly bitter flavour, much more. Also, when it comes to actually creating the parfait and turning it into a nice smooth texture, lots of people insist on pushing that through a sieve. I think that's unnecessary. It does give you a lovely smooth finish if your blitzer, whatever machine you're using to actually blitz everything up, is a little bit on the weak side. So if you're using something designed to make smoothies to do this, rather than a true kind of blender that makes everything shake when it blends things, like mine does, then you might want to pass the goo through a sieve. It's a bit of a faff, but if you have bits in your parfait, certainly worth doing. I won't be doing that with this because I'm blessed with a very powerful blender and it seems a little bit unnecessary. Okay, we have a very hot pan with chicken livers cooking quite fast in there now. I'm now going to add the sherry. And it has that wonderful satisfying noise where it almost quenches the heat and then starts boiling itself. At this point, I'm going to keep stirring the chicken livers and keeping them moving, but I'm also going to add a little bit of salt. I wish I could record the smell of this. It is absolutely fantastic. So, I'm going to add just a pinch of salt, chef's pinch of salt, and maybe a twist of pepper as well, just to season it up nicely. With any alcohol in a reduction like this, you want to make sure that all of the alcohol within the liquid has burned off. Alcohol evaporates at a much lower temperature than water, so it burns off fairly quickly. If you want it to be flash, with the spirits, it burns off in such a quantity that if you had a gas gas hob or even a match, you could flame it and pretend that you're a superhero or god of hellfire or something, I don't know. But with a sherry you struggle to actually get a flame on it. Right, that looks close to ready to me. Now they are looking distinctly not pink, although a little bit longer maybe on one or two of them. The second pile of butter I showed you, the one that was chopped up, that represents somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of this volume of chicken livers, is what goes into the blender with the chicken livers. Right, my chicken livers are now ready. I've got my blender here. I'm going to take the top off this beast and empty the chicken livers as well as that lovely sherry-ish liquor I suppose, into there. There we go. I'm also going to give the pan a little bit of a scrape round to make sure we don't miss any of those flavour bits. Now, the butter that I chopped up also goes into the blender in those little bits. Break it up a little bit, it'll puree through quicker. Lid on, spoony jobby in, and away we go with the blend. Run the blender for a little longer than you think is necessary. Always a little longer with these things, it helps no end. Finally, what we're going to end up doing is pouring this into the various bowls that we had. So now I'm going to start pouring. Very simple. Simply pushing it into the bottom of each individual ramekin or bowl. It should have a kind of texture that's just a little bit thicker than whipped double cream, and probably just one more ramekin that we'll end up doing there. There's plenty more around the blades. It always catches round the blades of a liquidizer, I find. It's quite difficult to get the goo out when it's something like this. It's alright if it's a smoothie or something like that because it just falls out, but something like a pate, it's got a bit of texture to it, is unlikely to come out from those blades. Okie dokie, right, I'm going to leave that and maybe clear it up for the third one later. Now we need these to be smooth. We need a nice smooth clean surface on top. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the edges off because I'm going to want a clean edge. I'm not going to want the edge to interfere with what I put on top in a short while. Then I'm going to tap them on the table, on the desk, in order to make sure that we've got a reasonably level surface. And again, whipping off the edges of those. I might use my spatula possibly to force it down a little bit. It's a little bit thicker than that would normally be, but that's not going to be a crisis in the slightest. Okie dokie. Right, quick wipe round the last one, and then they go into the fridge uncovered. Now it's quite important that you don't leave them in the fridge for too long. If you leave them in the fridge for too long, the lovely pink colour we've got on these will fade to a rather unappetizing grey, and that's not what you want. So you literally just want a little bit of set on these in order to make them so that I can run some butter over the top and we can seal them in. So on to our final part of making this parfait. The mystery last piece of butter comes in here. This piece of butter is going into a pan just to melt down. Don't want it to burn, don't want it to go brown, don't want noisette butter, nothing like that, just want it melted. Now, many recipes will tell you at this point that you need to clarify the butter. You need to take out the solids and make a ghee and all that sort of stuff. If you wanted to be super posh, yes, you could. But actually, we're just making something for lunch, so it's probably not necessary. The other thing that I didn't mention earlier that I meant to mention was you don't actually have to use any booze in this at all. If booze is not your bag, then you could just leave the booze out, or maybe a couple of teaspoons of stock would do the job equally as well. It's just something that adds flavour. It doesn't have to be there as an absolute given. It's not something that it's impossible to do the recipe without. The peppercorns now come in. I'm going to sprinkle just a few over the top of these pâtés that have been in the fridge. So they're now a little bit firmer than they were before they went in the fridge, and they can actually, as you can see, they actually just stick on the top. This is really partly decoration, but also actually, if you like pepper as I do, I love the warmth that pepper gives any dish. When you've got a nice piece of pâté in your mouth on a piece of crusty bread and you get a sudden hit of warmth from a peppercorn, it's actually quite an exciting thing to eat. So peppercorns are done. The butter is all but melted, and as you can see, it still has its solids in it. The white solidy bits on top are the butter solids. I'm not going to bother taking those off and clarifying the butter, but if you wanted to be super posh, you could. I'm just going to pour enough to cover the pâté over each, just to squeeze out of those, and then they go straight back in the fridge to set. To the victor, the spoils. Here we have our pâté. It's been in the fridge for about 24 hours. I've made some walnut and raisin bread, maybe a video of that later at some stage, some cornichons, some saucisson sec and some celery. What more could you want for lunch? Just to make the point, the butter on the top of the pâté almost means that you don't need any butter on the bread. The French would look at us by spreading butter on bread for pâtés as if we were bonkers. It's a very British thing to do. Anyway, let's take a proper look at it. Perfect.